The Tanzanian sun rose slowly, painting the horizon with shades of gold and orange. Mikumi National Park awoke in waves of life, with the sounds of the savanna echoing like an ancient symphony. Amid the dry bushes and vast plains, a muffled roar broke the morning's calm. It wasn't the triumphant roar of a king of the jungle, but a hoarse sound laden with pain. It was Kifaru, a young lion, barely over 4 years old, marked by fresh scars on his body. His left flank was wounded, likely from a failed hunt where a buffalo had struck him violently. Kifaru limped, his heavy breathing betraying the effort to stay on his feet. His golden eyes, once full of bravery, now wavered between the hope of survival and the fear of succumbing. He was alone. Expelled from his pride by older, stronger males, he wandered the lands of Mikumi in search of food and shelter, finding only pain and isolation. The hot wind carried the scent of dry earth and the trail of dust that rose with each faltering step. The pain was almost unbearable, but it was his survival instinct that drove him to the shade of a large African fig tree. There he collapsed onto the hard ground, panting. But he wasn't alone. From a higher branch, watching in silence, a pair of dark eyes observed him with an almost human intensity. It was Baraka, an imposing mountain gorilla who had strayed from his group. No one knew exactly why a gorilla was so far from the denser forest areas, but he seemed to roam the edge of the savanna like a silent shadow. Baraka was known to the few local rangers who had glimpsed him. A broad-chested male, nearly 2 meters, tall when standing, with an aura of mystery that set him apart from others. His name meant blessing in Swahili, and to many shepherds passing through those lands, the gorilla was almost a legend, a rare apparition, associated with omens. Kifaru, wounded, didn't notice the observer's presence. The blood on his flank attracted flies, making him even more vulnerable. His faint roar echoed through the air, not as a threat, but as a plea. It was almost a whimper, a confession of fragility one wouldn't expect from a lion. That sound reached Baraka, who remained motionless, assessing the scene with deep, inquisitive eyes. Time seemed to drag on. The sun climbed higher, burning hotter, and the lion battled thirst and pain. Then tension rose. Among the nearby bushes, a slithering shadow moved with fluidity. It wasn't an immediate threat to Baraka, but to Kifaru, it spelled certain death. A colossal African python emerged slowly, its muscles rippling under mottled skin. The serpent, patient and calculating, advanced toward the wounded lion, drawn by the vulnerability of its prey. Kifaru lifted his head, sensing danger but barely able to move. His eyes locked onto the enemy, but in a final act of instinct or desperation, they sought something beyond. And in that moment, the impossible happened. His eyes met Baraka's. There were no words, only a silent cry. The wounded lion, a dethroned and proud king, pleaded with his gaze. It was a request that transcended barriers, an acknowledgement that he couldn't survive alone. The roar that escaped his throat was unlike any other, not of anger, not of dominance. It was a cry for help. Baraka remained still, as if time were testing him. His broad chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, his massive fingers gripping the branch he leaned on. The python drew closer, slithering in calculated circles, preparing to strike. The savanna's silence was almost sepulchral. Even the birds ceased their song, as if nature itself awaited Baraka's decision. The gorilla descended slowly from the tree, each movement firm, controlled, but charged with contained energy. He walked to the base where Kifaru lay, the lion's eyes fixed on him, not with fear, but with a strange hope. It was a moment that defied all the rules of nature. The king of the savanna, at his weakest, seeking aid from a creature not of his world. The python, sensing the gorilla's approach, raised its head in defiance. Its massive body began to coil over the rocks, preparing for a strike. Baraka stared at the serpent with an intense gaze, as if he could read its intent. The air grew heavy. The savanna paw's dot was the beginning of something no one would believe if told. The story of a lion and a gorilla united not by instinct, but by something deeper: pain, vulnerability, and the chance that compassion might outweigh the law of the wild dot. And in that precise moment, with the heart of the savanna pulsing in suspense, the inevitable question echoes. Would Baraka heed Kifaru's silent plea? The python moved with calculated calm, as if it knew victory was already in its scales. Its body slithered slowly across the hot ground, dark patches glinting under the sun. Each muscle was like a taut rope, ready to crush. It was in no hurry, snakes never are. What is haste in the face of inevitable death? Its emotionless eyes were fixed on Kifaru, who panted, unable to rise. The young lion tried to lift his paws, but the weight of pain and exhaustion kept him pinned to the ground. His eyes narrowed in a mix of rage and supplication, his short mane trembling in the wind. A hoarse roar escaped his throat, but it lacked the strength to intimidate. It was just another echo of despair. Baraka watched. The gorilla seemed to wrestle within himself between two forces: the natural neutrality of an animal observing the cycle of life, and something deeper, almost human, burning in his chest. He breathed heavily, his nostrils flaring, his muscles tensing. Kifaru's silent plea still echoed in his mind. The python, sensing a moment of distraction, launched its attack. In a swift motion, it coiled part of its body around the lion's front paw. The dry snap of muscles against bone made Kifaru let out a roar of pain, so deep it echoed across the plain like distant thunder. The lion thrashed, but each attempt only tightened the scaly noose. The python was already preparing its next move, slithering toward the feline's neck. That's when Baraka reacted. In a leap surprising for his size, he charged at the serpent. His roar a guttural cry, not of predatory fury, but of pure determination, resounded through the air. The python paused for a second, confused, and turned its head toward the new enemy. But Baraka didn't hesitate. His fists, heavy as stones, pounded the ground, raising dust. In a swift move, he grabbed the middle of the serpent's body. The python writhed, trying to ensnare the gorilla in its deadly coils, but Baraka used all his weight and strength to prevent the snake from gaining ground. It was an uneven battle in tactics, but balanced in raw power. On one side, the serpent's suffocating strength. On the other, the gorilla's silent fury and resilience. The heart of the savanna seemed to beat faster. The wind stilled, the birds fell silent, even the rustling of the trees ceased. It was as if nature itself awaited the outcome. Kifaru, though weak, kept his eyes fixed on the scene. Within him, a spark of hope reignited. Perhaps there was still salvation. The struggle intensified. The python coiled around Baraka's arm, squeezing with violence. The gorilla roared in pain, but his eyes remained focused on his goal: to free the lion. With almost superhuman strength, he pulled the serpent back, away from Kifaru's wounded body. With each tug, the scales stretched, creaking like metal cords. Kifaru tried to move, but his legs barely responded. Still, he dragged his body a few inches, distancing himself from the battle's center. His eyes never left Baraka. There was not only admiration, but also something he never thought he'd feel for another species: trust. The python, realizing it would lose its main prey, turned its full attention to the gorilla. With startling speed, it lunged its head at Baraka, sharp teeth seeking flesh. But the gorilla was ready. With one hand, he seized the snake's neck before it could strike. With the other, he gripped the serpent's massive trunk and, in a move of pure brutality, began pulling in opposite directions. The sound that followed was not just physical, but almost spiritual. The creaking of scales giving way. The serpents. Resistance breaking before compassion turned into strength. The python thrashed violently, but each lunge was countered by the gorilla's colossal weight. The clash seemed to last an eternity, until, in one final pull, Baraka managed to free the lion's body completely. Kifaru collapsed to the side, free, though bleeding and exhausted. The relief in his golden eyes was immediate. A low roar escaped his throat, no longer of pain but of acknowledgement. The savanna, which had seemed suspended until then, began to breathe again. But the fight wasn't over yet. The python, though weakened, still tried to retaliate. Baraka, however, didn't seek to kill only to remove the threat. With firm movements, he pinned the serpent to the rocky ground, holding it until, defeated, it slithered slowly away, disappearing into the bushes. The silence that followed was dense. The wind returned, gently lifting golden dust around the two survivors. Baraka stood tall, his chest heaving from the effort, his dark eyes fixed on Kifaru. The lion, trembling, mustered the strength to lift his head and face his unlikely savior. In that gaze, something profound happened. Two worlds that should never have met recognized each other, not as predator and potential rival, but as beings who had faced the weight of death together. That moment was greater than any law of the jungle, greater than any instinct. It was pure. It was respect. Baraka didn't approach further. He stood a few meters away, watching, as if saying without words, "I've done my part. Now it's up to you to fight for life." Kifaru, exhausted, let out a low roar that sounded almost like gratitude. His eyes closed for a few seconds, but when they opened again, there was a different spark in them. It was no longer the look of a defeated lion, but of one who had been given a second chance. At that moment, the sun was high in the sky, illuminating the scene with an almost sacred force. The savanna seemed to witness an invisible pact between the two creatures, the pact of compassion, the pact of the improbable. The sun moved across the savanna, casting an intense light that seemed to illuminate not just the landscape but the memory of that extraordinary moment. The wind carried golden dust, and the distant rustling of acacias formed a soft melody, almost like a blessing. Kifaru, still lying on the hard ground, breathed with difficulty, but there was no longer fear in his eyes. The immediate danger had passed. He was alive, and he owed that life to a being he never imagined would be his ally, the gorilla Baraka. The lion tried to move, forcing his paws to support him. His body trembled. The wound in his flank still burned, but there was a new energy, a spark born of hope. Kifaru knew he wouldn't survive alone. The pain was too great. His strength was slipping away by the minute. Yet, as he looked at the gorilla standing motionless a few meters away, he realized something greater than his pain, the certainty that compassion existed even where it shouldn't. Baraka, for his part, didn't approach further. His deep, unfathomable black eyes watched the young lion with care, but without intent to dominate or intimidate. It was as if he were waiting for a decision, giving Kifaru the space to recognize that life still called him. He sought no recognition, no glory. His presence was silent, but laden with meaning. With each slow breath, Kifaru felt the weight of the experience. The python wasn't just a physical threat. It was a symbol of what he had been facing since being expelled from his pride: abandonment, pain, loneliness. The serpent's attack had been merely the final blow in a series of injustices that had brought him to the brink of the end. But now, looking at Baraka, he realized that even in the cruelest savanna, there was room for an unexpected act of kindness. With effort, the lion managed to rise, if only partially. His body arched, his paws faltered, but he held firm enough to let out a low roar. It wasn't a roar of threat or pain. It was a roar of rebirth. The sound echoed through the air, and the savanna responded. Flocks of birds took flight, and the silence turned into celebration. Baraka raised his head as if accepting that roar as confirmation that his choice had been worthwhile. For a brief moment, the two stood there, exchanging glances that needed no language. There was no need for words. What had happened between them was greater than any natural law, greater than any barrier between species. It was a silent pact. A pact of life. Soon after, Baraka began to walk away. His steps were firm but calm, as if he had no more to do there. He didn't look back. He sought no gratitude, no witnesses. His act had been pure, selfless. A gesture that would be lost in the mysteries of the savanna, kept only in Kifaru's memory. The young lion, still limping, watched until the gorilla's silhouette vanished among the distant trees. There was a mix of longing and respect in him. He knew he would never forget that encounter. That day, he hadn't just survived. He had learned that the most powerful force wasn't in sharp claws or crushing muscles, but in a heart that chooses to protect rather than destroy. As the hours passed, Kifaru found the strength to move forward. The savanna hadn't changed it, was still harsh, still unforgiving, but he no longer saw it the same way. Each step was a reminder that, even in the cruelest circumstances, an unexpected gesture could change fate. The physical scars of the attack would remain, marks that would tell the story of his struggle. But more than the scars, he would carry forever the memory of Baraka's gaze, the mysterious gorilla who had given him a second chance. It was as if nature itself had decided to show him that compassion is also part of the wild, even if rare and improbable. And so, the story of Kifaru and Baraka became an untold legend, an encounter no one would believe unless they had lived it. Perhaps on some distant night, around a campfire, Tanzanian shepherds and travelers still speak of the solitary gorilla who once saved a wounded lion. And perhaps those who hear it feel in their hearts the same message that resonated in the savanna. Kindness knows no boundaries. And you, who've made it this far, have you ever thought about how small acts of compassion can change destinies? This story reminds us that true strength isn't in dominating or winning, but in choosing to help, even when there's no obligation to do so. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, not just for me, but to be part of a community that believes in the power of stories that reveal the most human side of nature. Here, every video is an invitation to reflect, feel, and share. Leave in the comments. What was the moment in your life when an unexpected act of kindness changed everything? I'd love to hear your story, because it's in sharing that we build true connections. Did you enjoy the video? What did you learn from it? The savanna may seem distant, but the lessons it holds are universal. Like Kifaru and Baraka, we all have the chance to be the gorilla in someone's life, the hand that saves, the heart that chooses to act.